over the last few decades, science and technology have made tremendous advances. New words have entered our vocabulary, among them epigenetics. However, if we go back in time, we will see that Aristotle was the first who used another word, epigenesis. However, this word initially used by Aristotle is what inspired the first scientist in our century, the previous century, around mid-20th century, to use the word epigenetics to describe his own finding. In very few words, we could say that the field of epigenetics is the field of science which deals and explains living systems. It is now omnipresent in the academic but also non-academic world, and it has imposed a major theoretical shift on modern biology because it deals with previously neglected phenomena and introduces new levels of biological complexity. However, the questions that biologists ask are not only restricted to the questions that they are interested to provide answers. There are philosophers of science who are particularly interested in understanding and providing understanding to these concepts and conceptualize biological explanations. So, in a way, epigenetics holds some keys and provides some answers, new understanding of what life is. Despite its current topicality, as I have already told you, the term epigenetics is nothing but new because it was introduced by the British embryologist Conrad Waddington back in the 1940s. According to Waddington, epigenetics would on the one hand be associated with the Aristotelian theory of epigenesis, which understands development as consisting of both gradual and qualitative changes. On the other hand, it should also highlight the need to investigate processes above the gene as implied by the prefix epi, which in Greek means over or upon. More specifically, Waddington understood epigenetics as the science concerned with the causal analysis of development, the causal role of networks of interacting genes and how these networks bring phenotypes into being. Contemporary epigenetics is now defined as the field that studies heritable changes in gene expression caused by mechanisms than the modification of the DNA sequence. This means that while classical epigenetics was focused on the causal role of genes, many modern epigeneticists investigate how non-genetic changes are caused, perhaps environmental influences, and how these changes go down from generation to generation. This means that there has already been a change in the understanding. Back in the 1930s, there was a tendency to speak about the supremacy of the genes, and perhaps that was very successful for the time being, because you see, all understanding of how life works seems to go gradually from one level of understanding to the next, to the next, to the next, and what seems to be the whole truth when we are on the first step seems to be historical, prehistorical knowledge when you arrive at step 10, which in its own term and in its own time will also be realized or considered to be obsolete. So for some decades, perhaps up to 1960s, there was a rather gene-centered view of evolution that made it possible to unify natural selection and heredity under a sole causal unit. Gene is the name, and that came happening up to the 1960s. And then in the 1960s, a new understanding appeared. Biologists little by little realized that humans have not only far fewer genes than expected, but humans on the level of the genome, humans are nearly identical. And around that time, a new word made its own appearance: post-genomics. The field now dealt with how and when genes are expressed. And they little by little came to understand that genes are expressed, and not the way that the genes are expressed is not determined intrinsically, as the old understanding was, but rather by the gene's cellular and organismic environment. And that's how the scientists in the fields of epigenetics started to realize how connected this field is to biosciences. And the more the understanding, the better they could explain not only organisms, plastic and environmentally responsive development, but also how changes in ontogenetic pathways can affect population dynamics and thus evolutionary trajectories. So the gene centrism subsided, Lamarck was resurrected, and in 1990s there was a lot of discussion among the academia about the Lamarckian dimension of epigenetics. As it is very well understood, epigenetics is still fighting to discover or establish its own identity. It's very new as a discipline, and that's why it does not present any clear-cut and sharp boundaries. Still trying to find what is what. However, there are some very important characteristics which can be grouped in three groups. One, it allows us to broadly understand what epigenetics is. Two, it allows us to see the directions, the trends in biology. And three, it allows us to fill gaps in our current philosophical theories of scientific explanation. Next, we are going to see some of the terms which are so widely used in epigenetics.